She thought she was just carrying champagne. She had no idea she was walking straight into the most dangerous moment of her life. The glass almost shattered, the bottle almost fell. And the man who caught both of them, caught her, was not the kind of man who did anything without a reason. He controlled half of New York's underworld. His enemies didn't argue with him. They disappeared. And he was looking at her like she was the first real thing he'd seen in years. She'd never been kissed, never been chosen, never been seen. Until tonight. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people, if you've ever worked yourself to the bone and still felt like you didn't matter, then this story was written for you. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Let's begin. The shift started the way every shift started, badly. Nia Brooks was 17 minutes late because the Uptown 2 train had stalled somewhere between 72nd and 86th, and the conductor's voice crackling through the intercom had delivered the news with the particular indifference of someone who had stopped caring about other people's problems a long time ago. She'd stood in the car with her coat half-buttoned, her non-slip shoes already on because she'd learned not to waste time changing at the restaurant, and she'd counted her options the way she always counted them. Call ahead. Don't call. Walk faster. There was never a good option. There was only the one that made the next hour slightly more survivable. She called ahead. Her manager, Dominic Reyes, picked up on the second ring and said, "Brooks, don't," and hung up. That was the whole conversation. The Imperial Lotus occupied the top 2 floors of a building on 57th Street that had once been a private bank. And whoever had converted it into a restaurant had kept the vault doors and the marble floors and the feeling that money was the only language spoken there. The staff entrance was on the side street, through a door with a keypad that always stuck on cold nights. Nia entered the code twice before it let her in, took the service elevator up, and clocked in while Dominic stood 3 feet away watching her with the expression of a man suffering through something he couldn't bill for. 2 minutes, he said. 17, she said. Train. I don't care about the train, Brooks. I care about the VIP lounge. Table 7 has been requesting extended service for the last 45 minutes, which means we are now in the part of the evening where I need everybody I have on the floor and not on the subway. I'm here now. Barely. He shoved a tray into her hands. Champagne service, 3 flutes, 1 bottle of Cristal that cost more than her monthly rent. Lounge. Don't make eye contact. Don't make conversation. Don't make anything except yourself invisible. She was good at that part. The VIP lounge at the Imperial Lotus was separated from the main dining floor by a set of frosted glass panels and a velvet rope that existed mostly for aesthetic purposes, because the real barrier was the unspoken understanding that certain tables were not for public consumption. Nia had worked that lounge maybe a dozen times in her 2 years at the restaurant, and each time felt like stepping into a different atmosphere, thicker, quieter, pressurized in a way she couldn't explain. The people who sat there didn't look around the way normal diners did. They faced forward. They spoke low. They had already decided everything worth deciding before they arrived. She pushed through the service door with her shoulder and stepped onto the floor. There were 4 men at table 7. 3 of them she clocked immediately as security, not because of anything dramatic, no earpieces or visible weapons, but because of the way they were sitting, backs to the wall where they could, positioned slightly outside the conversational circle, hands loose, alert without performing alertness. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where you learn to read rooms fast, and she read this one in about 4 seconds. The 4th man was seated at the center of the table, and he was reading something on his phone with the calm of someone who had never once been rushed in his life. Nia moved to the service station on the far wall and began opening the champagne. She'd done it hundreds of times. The foil, the cage, the controlled pressure on the cork. It was muscle memory. The problem was that the floor had been mopped sometime in the last hour, and whoever had done it had not let it fully dry. And when she shifted her weight to angle the pour, her left foot went out from under her. It happened in maybe 2 seconds. Her right hand threw out for balance and caught nothing. The tray tilted. The bottle left her grip. She went sideways. And then something stopped her. 2 things, actually. A hand closed around her forearm, firm and immediate, and another caught the champagne bottle from the air so cleanly it barely made a sound. She was breathing hard. Her heart was in her throat. And the man from table 7 was standing directly in front of her, holding $1,000 bottle of Cristal in one hand and her arm in the other, looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. Not anger, not amusement, something else. "You're all right," he said. It wasn't a question. His English was precise, lightly accented, the kind that came from years of careful practice rather than childhood immersion. He was taller than she'd expected, broad through the shoulder, dressed in a charcoal suit that had clearly been made for his body specifically. His face was angular and composed and so completely still that she had the strange, disorienting feeling that she was the only thing in the room currently in motion. She found her footing. He released her arm. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The floor is wet." He glanced down at it, then at the bottle in his hand. "And the champagne is intact." He set it on the tray with a precision that suggested he'd handled expensive things all his life, returned to his chair, and picked up his phone again. That was it. That was the whole interaction. Except it wasn't, because as Nia stood there catching her breath and trying to decide if she was going to cry in the lounge or wait and cry in the service hallway, he looked up from his phone and said, without any particular emphasis, "When did you last eat?" She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Eat," he said. "Food. When?" This morning." "What did you have?" The question was so ordinary and so completely unexpected that she answered it honestly before she could think about whether she should. "Half a granola bar. I was running late." He looked at her for a moment. Then he set his phone face down on the table, which she would later understand was a significant gesture from a man whose phone never went face down. "Sit," he said. "I can't sit. I'm working." "You nearly fell on my table. The least I can do is feed you." He glanced toward one of his men and said something in Korean, low and brief, and the man immediately rose and headed toward the kitchen. Then he looked back at her. "Sit." She sat. She didn't know why. She sat in the empty chair across from him at the corner of the table, and she was aware of how absurd this was. A waitress, in her uniform, sitting at a VIP table she'd been sent to serve. And she watched him pick up his phone again and continue reading whatever he'd been reading, like her presence was completely unremarkable. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Kong Taijun." He didn't look up. The name meant nothing to her then. That would come later. "I'm Nia." "I know, it's on your name tag." She looked down. It was. "Right," she said. The food arrived faster than it should have, which told her his instruction had carried weight in that kitchen. A small plate of rice, banchan, a bowl of soup that smelled rich and real. She stared at it. "Eat," he said again, still not looking up. She ate. She was hungry enough that the first few bites required concentrated effort not to consume too fast, and the soup was genuinely good, better than anything she'd had in days, and she didn't realize how much was showing on her face until Taejun set his phone down again and looked at her with that same unnamed expression. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. 2 years. "And before that?" "Different restaurants. A few retail jobs. Whatever was hiring." He nodded slowly. Not the nod of someone absorbing information, the nod of someone confirming something they already suspected. "You're from New York originally?" "Brooklyn." She paused. "You?" "Seoul. Though I've spent enough time here that the distinction has become somewhat theoretical." He said it flat, like a fact, not like something meant to be charming, which made it strangely more interesting. She found herself asking questions she had no professional business asking. She asked how long he'd been in New York. He said 12 years. She asked what he did, and he said international business, which was the kind of answer that told you nothing while being technically accurate, and she noted that and filed it away. She told him about Brooklyn because something about the quality of his attention made the words come easier than they should have. The neighborhood she'd grown up in. Her mother, who'd worked nights and slept days and done both at the same time in a way that left very little room for a child who needed something Nia couldn't articulate. The feeling of always being slightly to the left of where everyone else was standing. "Invisible," she said at some point, not meaning to say it out loud. Taejun didn't rush to fill the silence after that. He let it sit for a moment, and then he said, "That requires a particular kind of discipline, surviving invisibility." "Not discipline, just, you don't really have a choice." "Yes, you do," he said quietly. "Everyone does. Most people just don't see the choices they're making." She looked at him. He was watching her the way she'd noticed him watching nothing else in this room. Directly, without the polite glancing away that most people did. It was uncomfortable. It was also the most seen she'd felt in recent memory, which said something she didn't want to examine too closely. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "You can ask." "Do you—" She stopped. Started again. "Do you ever feel like you built a life that doesn't quite fit? Like you made all the decisions you were supposed to make and you're still not inside the thing you thought you were building?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes." "What do you do with that?" "I work," he said, "and occasionally I sit in restaurants and ask exhausted waitresses when they last ate." It surprised a laugh out of her. Small, genuine, a little rough around the edges. His expression shifted barely at all, but something behind his eyes changed. "I've never—" She stopped herself again. "Say it," he said. "It's embarrassing." Most honest things are. She looked at her hands, then at him. "I've never been kissed. I know how that sounds. I'm 23. I know, but I've been working, or surviving, or both. And She exhaled. The version of me that someone would want to kiss didn't really have room to exist. The table was quiet. One of his men shifted almost imperceptibly in his peripheral. Taejun didn't look away from her. "That's not embarrassing," he said. "It feels embarrassing." Embarrassment and truth are different things. A pause. "The version of you that's sitting here right now, so that's the one that exists. That's sufficient." She felt something in her chest do something she couldn't describe. Not a flutter, more like a pressure releasing, like a door that had been pressed shut from the outside, finally losing the weight against it. "We'll take this one step at a time," he said. Quietly. Like it was a decision. She didn't know what that meant exactly. She wasn't sure he did either entirely. But the way he said it, measured, certain, unhurried, told her he wasn't making a performance out of it. He meant it the way people mean things when they've already thought them through. Dominic appeared at the entrance of the lounge, clocked the scene. His waitress sitting at a VIP table eating the VIP's food, while the VIP watched her with the focus of a man reviewing quarterly reports. And his face cycled through approximately 4 emotions in 2 seconds before settling on something unreadable. He caught Nia's eye. She rose immediately. "I have to get back," she said. Taejun nodded once. He picked up his phone. She took the tray. She walked back to the service station. She poured 3 champagne flutes with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. She did not look back at him for the rest of the shift. She was too afraid of what her face would do. At the end of the night, when she retrieved her coat from the staff room and pulled her MetroCard from her pocket, she found a folded piece of paper she hadn't put there. Inside was a phone number and 4 words in handwriting that was precise and a little severe, like the man himself. "In case the floor is wet." She stood in the doorway of the staff room and read it twice. Then she folded it again, put it in her inside coat pocket, buttoned the coat, and walked out into the rain. She didn't think about him the whole way home. She thought about him the entire way home. She didn't text the number for 4 days. This was a choice she made every morning when she woke up and every night before she slept. And she was aware that it was a choice, which meant she was also aware that she was spending an embarrassing amount of mental energy on a piece of paper from a man she'd spoken to for maybe 40 minutes total. She put the paper in the drawer of her nightstand. Then she took it out and put it on the kitchen counter where she could see it while she made coffee. Then she put it back in the drawer because looking at it while making coffee was clearly a sign of something she didn't want to name. On the 5th day, she texted, "The floor is still wet, for the record." He replied in 11 minutes, "Then be more careful." That was it. No follow-up. No question. Just those 4 words, and then silence. And she sat on her bed with her phone in her hands, and the particular feeling of someone who has walked through a door and is now standing in a room they haven't fully looked at yet. She texted back, "That's your advice? Be more careful?" It's practical advice. Very romantic. A pause. Then, "I wasn't trying to be romantic." She didn't know why that made her smile. She put the phone face down on the mattress and went to make coffee and thought about him the entire time she was doing it. That was how it started. Not with flowers or grand gestures, but with texts that arrived at odd hours, sometimes 7 in the morning, sometimes past midnight, that were never long and always specific. He asked about her shifts. She complained about Dominic, whose management style she described as a man who genuinely believes that stress is a motivational tool. And Taejun replied, "Some men confuse fear with respect. They're usually afraid of both." She told him about the regulars she liked, an older woman named Mrs. Papadopoulos, who always ordered the sea bass and always tipped in exact cash, and about the ones she didn't, the tables that snapped their fingers to get her attention, the ones who looked through her like she was furniture. He read everything. She could tell because he referenced things days later, offhand, the way people do when they've been paying attention. What she didn't know was what he was doing with those 11-minute gaps between her messages and his replies. She didn't know he was sitting in his car outside a distribution warehouse in Flushing watching two of his lieutenants argue over a territory dispute that had been simmering for 3 months, and that he was reading her texts about Mrs. Papadopoulos and the sea bass, while one of his men, a compact, hard-faced man named Park Soo-han, stood 6 feet away trying to hold it together. She didn't know that Soo-han had noticed the phone, had noticed the frequency of it, had said nothing yet. She didn't know any of that because Taejun hadn't told her. And because she didn't know it, she couldn't know what was already building in the spaces between their conversations. 3 weeks after the champagne incident, he called instead of texted. She was on the fire escape of her apartment in Harlem, eating leftover rice straight from the container because she'd gotten home at 11:30 and didn't have the energy to pretend she was going to plate anything. Her building's super had still not fixed the hallway light on her floor, so she'd been navigating the corridor by phone flashlight for going on 2 weeks, and the evening had the particular edge of mid-autumn in New York. Cold enough to be uncomfortable, not cold enough to justify how much it was bothering her. His name came up on her screen and she stared at it for one full ring before answering. "Hi," she said. "You're outside," he said. Not a question. "Fire escape. How did you—" "Traffic noise. Different quality than inside." She looked out at the street. 2 cabs arguing with their horns, a distant siren, the particular bass hum of the city that you stopped hearing after a while and then heard again all at once. "That's very specific. I pay attention. I'm starting to notice that." A pause. She could hear something on his end, indoor silence, the kind that meant a large space. "Are you all right?" The question caught her the same way it had in the lounge. Unexpected, direct, not performed. "Yeah, tired, long shift. Did you eat?" "I'm eating right now." "What?" "Rice." "Just rice?" "Rice is a complete food." "Nia. It has vegetables in it. From yesterday. It's fine." She set the container on her knee. "You can't call me at 11:30 to interrogate my nutritional choices." "I wasn't interrogating. I was asking. There's a thin line." "There isn't, actually." A beat. "I have a dinner. Tomorrow evening. Not a restaurant. A private residence. I'd like you to come." She was quiet for a moment. Down on the street, a man was walking a very small dog that was moving with tremendous purpose, covering ground like it had somewhere important to be. "That's a significant jump from texts about my coworkers." "Yes." "You're not going to explain more than that?" "I'd prefer you ask your questions in person." She thought about the piece of paper in her nightstand drawer, about the 11-minute gaps, about the way he'd said we'll take this one step at a time, and meant it like someone reading from an internal document rather than offering a comfort. "What should I wear?" "Something you're comfortable in." "That's not helpful." "It's honest." A pause. "I'll send a car at 7. He hung up before she could respond to that, which she was beginning to understand was simply a thing he did. She sat on the fire escape with her rice getting cold and looked at her phone and then looked at the street and thought, this is either nothing or it's everything, and I genuinely cannot tell which. The car was a black Mercedes with tinted windows and a driver who introduced himself as Min and offered nothing further. Nia sat in the back seat in the dark green wrap dress she'd owned for 2 years and worn exactly twice and tried to look like someone who was regularly collected by professional drivers. She did not succeed at this, but she tried. They crossed to the Upper East Side and stopped in front of a building whose lobby she could see through the glass doors. Marble, low lighting, a security desk with 2 men behind it who were clearly doing more than signing in visitors. Min escorted her to the elevator without being asked. The elevator opened onto a private foyer, which meant the entire upper floor was one apartment, which was the kind of thing she understood theoretically, but had never encountered directly. Taejun opened the door himself. He was in dark trousers and a gray shirt, no jacket, collar open. It was the most undone she'd seen him, which relative to the rest of the world was still extremely composed, and he looked at her for a moment before stepping back to let her in. "You found it," he said. "Your driver brought me to it. You didn't get out of the car and walk the other direction. That's finding it." She stepped inside. The apartment was what she expected and also nothing like what she'd built in her head. Floor-to-ceiling windows along the entire south wall, Manhattan below like a circuit board lit from underneath, and the interior arranged with the spare, deliberate quality of someone who had thought carefully about what they actually wanted around them, rather than filling space because it was there. Books. Art that wasn't decorative in the hotel sense, but specific. Pieces that someone had chosen with a point of view. A long dining table set for two. "No bodyguards?" she asked. "They're here. You just don't see them." She looked around involuntarily, and he said, "Don't. You'll make yourself anxious." "I'm already anxious." "I know." He moved toward the kitchen. Actual kitchen, not catered. And she followed because standing in the entrance alone felt worse. "Sit. I'll get you something to drink." "You cooked?" "A chef prepared it earlier. I finished it." "Is that a distinction that matters?" "To me, yes." She sat at the island. He poured her a glass of something that turned out to be a light Korean rice wine, and she sipped it and watched him move around the kitchen with the competence of someone who had spent actual time learning this rather than delegating it. He knew where everything was without looking. He moved efficiently, no wasted motion. "You didn't tell me anything about yourself," she said. "In the restaurant. You let me talk for an hour and you gave me almost nothing. You needed to talk." "That's not an answer." He set a dish on the island, sat across from her. "What do you want to know?" "What you actually do. Not international business, what that means." He looked at her. The kitchen was quiet enough that she could hear the building. A low structural hum, the sound of a space built to absorb. "I run an organization," he said. "It operates across multiple cities. New York, Seoul, a few cities in between. Some of what it does is legitimate. Real estate, logistics, hospitality. And some of it isn't." "No." She held his gaze. "How not legitimate?" "Enough that there are people who would prefer I didn't exist." He said it plainly, without drama, which was somehow more alarming than if he'd tried to soften it. "Enough that the men in this apartment who you can't see are necessary." "Are you dangerous?" "Yes." The single syllable sat between them. She had expected hedging. She had expected a version of the answer that left room for interpretation. She had not expected that. "Then why am I here?" she asked. "Because I wanted you to be here." A pause. "And because I think you deserve to know what you're sitting with before you decide whether you want to keep sitting with it." Something in her chest pulled tight. She looked at her wine glass, at the food she hadn't touched, at the city below the window, glittering and indifferent. "I grew up in a building where 2 of my neighbors got shot in the same year," she said. "I'm not naive about what dangerous looks like." "I know. But there's a difference between knowing something exists and deciding to—" She stopped. "I don't know what I'm deciding." "You don't have to decide tonight." "You keep saying things like that, one step at a time. You don't have to decide tonight, like you're managing me." "I'm not managing you." His voice was even, but there was something underneath it now. "I'm trying not to move faster than you're ready to move. There's a difference." "How would you know what I'm ready for?" "I don't. That's exactly why I'm going slow." She stared at him. He stared back. The city hummed below them. "Tell me something true," she said. "Something you don't usually tell people." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "I haven't slept more than 4 hours at a stretch in approximately 2 years. I function, but I don't rest. I haven't—" He stopped, started again. "I haven't wanted to. Resting requires turning certain things off, and I haven't wanted to turn them off because when I do, I think about the things I've done that I can't undo." The room was very still. "How many things?" she asked quietly. "Enough." She didn't push further. Neither of them spoke for a moment, and then she picked up her chopsticks and began to eat, and he watched her and then picked up his own. And the dinner proceeded with a quality that was nothing like what she'd expected and everything she hadn't known to want. Two people eating together with the careful honesty of people who have decided, without formally deciding, to stop pretending. But she didn't tell anyone about him, not at first. Her coworker Jasmine, who had worked the Lotus for 4 years and processed the world primarily through a series of extremely accurate observations delivered at maximum volume, noticed the change in Nia's face around week 3 and cornered her in the break room between the lunch and dinner service. "You look different," Jasmine said. "I'm the same." "You're smiling at the coffee machine." "I like coffee." "Nia, nobody smiles at a coffee machine. What is happening to you?" "Nothing is happening." "Something is definitely happening." Jasmine pointed at her with a stir. "Is it a man?" "Jasmine, it's a man." "Okay. Who is he? What does he do? And does he have a friend? Because Marcus and I just hit month 7 and I need something to compare him against." Nia laughed despite herself. "It's nothing, okay? It's..." She exhaled. "It's complicated." "Complicated how?" "How? Complicated he's married. Complicated he's got kids. Complicated he's not someone I should probably be spending time with." Jasmine lowered the stir. Her voice changed. "Complicated dangerous?" A pause. "Jasmine, that's not a no." "It's not..." Nia stopped. "I can handle myself." "I know you can handle yourself. I've watched you handle Mr. Fontaine at table 4 for 2 years, and that man is a war crime in boat shoes. I'm not asking if you can handle it. I'm asking if you know what you're handling." The break room was small and smelled like dish soap and someone's reheated lunch. Nia looked at the coffee in her cup. "Not completely," she said. "No." Jasmine was quiet for a moment. Then, in a different register entirely. "Be careful, okay? Just be careful." "He's not..." "It's not what you're probably imagining." "I'm imagining a lot of things, Nia. Most of them involve you in a situation you can't get out of." "I can always get out?" "That's what everybody says." She was wrong about being able to always get out. She knew she was wrong before Jasmine said it, but hearing it in someone else's voice made the truth of it land differently. What she didn't know was that the situation she couldn't get out of had already started arranging itself without her input. Suhan approached Taijun 3 days after the dinner. Nia didn't know this happened. She didn't know that Suhan had been Taijun's second-in-command for 7 years, that he had built the New York operation from the street level up, that he had absorbed losses and absorbed violence and absorbed every tactical setback with the steadiness of someone who believed absolutely in the structure he served. She didn't know that his loyalty was real and that it was also, underneath, heavily conditional on Taijun remaining the version of himself that Suhan had signed on to follow. They met in the building's conference room, not the office, the conference room, which was Suhan's way of signaling that this was formal rather than personal. Taijun noted it and said nothing. Suhan sat across the table with his hands folded. "You're distracted." "I'm managing 3 active operations and a pending land acquisition in Incheon. I'm not distracted." "You left the Flushing meeting 20 minutes early." "I delegated. That's leadership." "You delegated to Cho, who then made a decision about the Queensbridge distribution that you would never have made, and now Park Ji-won thinks we're soft on the east side." Suhan's voice didn't rise. It never rose. It just got more precise. "This is the 3rd departure from your normal operating pattern in the last 3 weeks." "I'm entitled to departures from pattern. Not when people are watching you for them." Suhan paused. "Who is she?" The room went very still. Taijun held his gaze. "That's not your concern." "It becomes my concern when it affects your judgment." "My judgment is fine." "Your judgment arranged dinner service for a waitress at the Lotus, settled her restaurant tab, and had the building's security reviewed because a man at table 9 looked at her twice." Suhan's voice was level. "Which means you've already run her through background. Which means you know she has no connection to any other family, no leverage value, no operational relevance. Which means she is purely personal, and purely personal, in your position, is a liability." "Don't lecture me about liability. Someone has to." Suhan sat forward slightly. "You know what happens when men like us have something purely personal. You know because you're the one who's used it, twice, on other people." The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the silence of a thing being acknowledged that both men would have preferred to leave unacknowledged. "She doesn't know enough to be in danger," Taijun said. "She doesn't have to know anything. She just has to exist. A pause. Jinho's people have a man watching this building. You know this. If they follow the patterns, they'll run her in a week. Taejun's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Something that Suhan, who had spent 7 years reading that face, recognized immediately. You already know, Suhan said. You already know they're going to find her. I've been managing it. By doing what? By keeping her schedule unpredictable and her profile low, and by keeping her close. Suhan leaned back, which is the opposite of keeping her safe. The argument that followed was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was precise and cold and covered ground that neither of them had covered before, which meant it covered things that had been building for longer than 3 weeks. Suhan said Taejun was making emotional decisions for the first time in 7 years, and didn't know it because men who had never made emotional decisions didn't recognize them when they finally arrived. Taejun said Suhan was confusing discipline with restriction and that the organization did not own every aspect of his life. Suhan said the organization owned exactly those aspects that could bring it down, and that Taejun had always understood this because Taejun had written that rule. You wrote it, Suhan said, after what happened in Seoul. You sat across from me in a room very much like this one, and you said, anything personal is structural risk, and structural risk gets corrected. Do you remember? Yes. Then you know what I'm saying. I know what you're saying, Taejun's voice was even. It doesn't change anything. Suhan looked at him for a long moment. Then something has already changed, he said, and I don't know if that's going to end well for any of us. He stood, straightened his jacket, and left. Taejun sat alone in the conference room for 12 minutes, not moving, not on his phone, just sitting with his hands flat on the table and the city visible through the window behind him, and he was thinking about the fire escape in Harlem and rice with vegetables, and a woman who had said, I've never been kissed like it was a confession she'd been holding a long time, and he was thinking about Suhan's face when he'd said, you already know they're going to find her. He picked up his phone. He did not call Nia. He called someone else, a man named Ryu, who handled certain logistical problems. And he said, quietly and completely without emotion, I need the building on 141st reviewed, full perimeter, and I need to know who Jinho has watching the East Corridor on 5th. He hung up. He sat for another moment. Then he thought about what she'd said over dinner. I don't know what I'm deciding. And he thought that she might have already decided without knowing it, and that the thing he had not told her, the thing he should have told her before any of this went as far as it had gone, was not the nature of his work or the names of his enemies. It was that once you were inside his orbit, truly inside it, the question of leaving stopped being simple. He had not told her that yet. He needed to tell her that before someone else did. He called her the next morning. Not a text. A call, before 8, which he had never done before. And when she picked up, her voice was still carrying the rough edge of sleep, and she said, hello, the way people say it when they're not entirely sure they're awake yet. I need to see you today, he said. A pause. She was processing. He could hear the small sounds of her moving sheets, the creak of a mattress. Today. This afternoon, if you can. I know you have a shift tonight. What's wrong? The question was faster than he'd expected. She was sharper than she let most people see, and he'd known that from the first night, but it still caught him occasionally. Nothing is wrong. There's something I should have told you earlier, and I'd rather tell you in person. Another pause. That's the kind of sentence that makes everything worse, not better. I know, I'm sorry. He heard her exhale. Not angry, not frightened, just calculating. The sound of someone deciding how much to trust their instincts against how much they wanted to trust the person on the other end. 2 o'clock, she said. I have to be on the train by 5:30. I'll have Min drive you. Taejun. Yes. Whatever it is, just say it straight, okay? Don't manage it. I won't. He almost kept that promise. She arrived at the apartment at 2:15 in jeans and a heavy sweater, hair pulled back, looking like someone who had prepared themselves for a difficult conversation by making sure they were comfortable enough to sit through it. He noticed that. He noticed most things about her by now in the way you notice things that you've started measuring the world against without realizing when that started. He had coffee ready. She took it and sat on the couch, not at the island, which meant she wanted the distance of the larger space between them. also noticed. He sat in the chair across from her, didn't drag it out. There are people who watch this building, he said. Competitors. Rivals within my industry, for lack of a better word. They track patterns. Who comes? Who goes? Who appears more than once? She held her coffee with both hands and said nothing. You've been here twice. You'll be in their records by now. Possibly by the second visit, definitely by now. He paused. That means they know you exist. They don't know who you are yet, but they know you're connected to me, and they will find out who you are because finding out who people are is what they do. Okay, she said. Just that word, flat and waiting. When they find out who you are, you become a variable they'll consider using. That's not speculation. It's how this works. I've done it to other people. I know exactly how it works. The last sentence landed the way he'd expected it to. Her expression didn't collapse, but something in it recalibrated. The acknowledgement that the man across from her had, at some previous point in his life, done to someone else's person exactly what he was now describing being done to hers. She held that for a moment. You said you'd say it straight, she said. I'm saying it straight. Then say the part you're building toward. What are you actually telling me? He held her gaze. I'm telling you that the safest thing for you would be to stop seeing me. And I'm telling you that I don't want you to stop seeing me. And I'm telling you both of those things because I told you I wouldn't manage it. The apartment was quiet. On the street 40 floors below, the city proceeded with its complete indifference. Nia set her coffee down on the table. She looked at it for a moment, then at him, with the expression of someone doing math they didn't entirely want to do. The people who are watching, she said, are they dangerous? Specifically dangerous, not theoretically. Yes. To me, potentially, yes. And there's nothing you can do about them watching? I'm managing it, but managing it is not the same as eliminating it. So you want me to make a choice, she said, with incomplete information about something I don't fully understand in a situation I didn't create. That's accurate. That's not fair. No, he said, it isn't. He didn't apologize for it because they both knew an apology wasn't the point. She was quiet for long enough that he started to understand what the answer was going to be. Not from anything she said, from the way she was sitting. The stillness of someone who has already arrived at a decision and is simply finishing the work of examining it before they speak it out loud. I'm not walking away, she said. I want to be clear that I understand what you're telling me, and I'm not walking away. Something in him released and tightened simultaneously. Relief and the particular weight of someone accepting a responsibility. You are handing them, knowing the cost isn't fully visible yet. Fully. Nia, I'm not finished. She looked at him steadily. But I need you to stop making decisions about my safety without telling me. If someone is watching this building, I need to know. If something changes, I need to know before your men do, not after. That's what I need. Agreed, he said, without hesitation. And I need to understand more about what this is. Not everything. I know you can't give me everything, but enough that I'm not walking around in the dark making decisions I don't have the information to make. She paused. Can you do that? Yes. Okay. She picked up her coffee. Her hands were steady. Then tell me about Jin-ho. He went very still. Suhan's not subtle when he's agitated, she said. I heard him say the name outside the elevator last week when I was leaving. You both stopped talking when the doors opened. She tilted her head slightly. You looked at him like he'd done something wrong by saying it where I could hear. So, Jin-ho. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, not stalling, just adjusting. The way you adjust when someone reveals they've been paying closer attention than you gave them credit for. And then he looked at her and said, Han Jin-ho. He runs a competing organization. Seoul-based, New York expansion, 3 years behind mine. He's been trying to accelerate that expansion by creating instability in my operations. How? Disrupting supply lines, turning peripheral contacts, applying pressure to people who work adjacent to my organization until they become unreliable. A pause. And identifying vulnerabilities. And I'm a vulnerability. You are to me, he said quietly, which makes you one to him. She absorbed this without flinching, which he had come to expect from her, and which still struck him each time as a particular kind of courage, not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear reorganize her face. What does he want, ultimately? Control of the Eastern distribution network and the financial channels I've built over 10 years. He can't build them himself in any reasonable time frame. It's faster to take them. By taking you out. Or by taking something I won't negotiate on. The sentence hung there. They both understood what it meant. She didn't look away. Okay, she said, for the second time that afternoon, in the same tone, not casual, not resigned, but the particular okay of someone who is filing information in real time and moving forward. He thought, she is either the bravest person I have sat in this apartment with, or she doesn't yet understand how bad it can get. He thought, possibly both. He didn't know, sitting there with the city behind him and her coffee going cold on his table, that the thing he hadn't told her, the thing he was still managing rather than disclosing, was already 24 hours from forcing itself into the open in the worst possible way. It was Jasmine who called her at 11:40 that night. Nia was walking out of the Lotus after her shift, coat half-buttoned, already calculating the train. Jasmine's name on the screen was unexpected. They texted, they didn't usually call, and she picked up with the automatic low-grade alertness of someone who's learned that late calls generally mean something has shifted. "Where are you right now?" Jasmine said. Not hello, not hey. "Where are you right now?" "Outside the restaurant. Why? What happened?" "A man came in tonight, during dinner service. He sat in your section. Well, he asked for your section specifically, which Dominic thought was weird but seated him anyway because it was a busy night and he's Dominic." A breath. "He wasn't there for the food, Nia. He asked me where you lived. Straight up asked me, like it was a normal question. Said he was an old friend." The sidewalk under her feet, the cold, a cab going past too fast. She noted all of it the way you note things when your body has gone into a mode that catalogs the world more precisely than usual. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, obviously. I told him I don't discuss staff." Jasmine's voice was controlled, but not quite. "But Nia, he didn't leave right away. He sat there. He ordered one drink and he watched the floor for 40 minutes, and then he left. And he looked at the staff entrance when he left. Like he was clocking it." "Okay." She was walking. Not toward the train, moving because standing still felt wrong. "What did he look like?" Jasmine described him. Korean, 50s, heavy through the shoulders, a scar along the left jawline that she'd noticed because she'd spent 40 minutes aware of him in the way you become aware of people who are making your instincts go loud. He'd been polite. He'd tipped well. He'd said nothing threatening by any technical measure. "Who is this man you're seeing?" "Jasmine. I'm not being nosy. I'm being serious." "Who is he?" "Because someone is looking for you through your workplace, and that's—" Her voice caught slightly. "That's not a normal situation." Nia stopped walking. She was on a side street, quieter, the noise of the avenue behind her. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. "I know," she said. "I know it's not." "Are you safe?" "Yes." She said it because she believed it, and also because she needed to say it out loud to see how it felt. It felt mostly true. "I'll explain when I can. Don't tell Dominic. Don't tell anyone else." "Nia, I'll be okay. I promise. Don't tell anyone." She hung up and called Tae-jun. He picked up on the first ring. She told him what Jasmine had told her briefly, in order, without editorializing. When she finished, there was a silence on his end that lasted maybe 4 seconds and had a different quality than his usual pauses, compressed, like something being rapidly recalculated. "Go back inside the restaurant," he said. "I'm already outside. I can just—" "Go back inside. Tell them you forgot something. Stay inside until Min arrives. Do not take the train. Tae-jun, please." The word came out with an edge she hadn't heard before, not commanding, something rawer than that. "Please just go back inside." She went back inside. She told Dominic she'd forgotten her phone charger and stood in the break room for 11 minutes until her own phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that read, "Black Escalade. Plate ends in 7741. Mine." The drive was silent. She watched the city through the tinted window and thought about Jasmine's voice saying, "Are you safe?" and thought about the man with the scar sitting in her section watching the floor for 40 minutes. At the apartment, Tae-jun was not alone. Soo-han was there, and 2 other men she'd seen in the background of things but never been introduced to, and the energy in the room was the energy of a space that had been engaged in rapid, serious conversation before she walked in and had stopped when she did. Taijun crossed to her immediately, not running, but direct, no pause at the door, and looked at her face with the focused attention of someone checking for damage. "You're all right," he said. "You keep saying that like a question." "Because I keep needing to confirm it." He turned to Suhan. "Give us a minute." Suhan looked at her, then at Taijun, and his face held the complex and not entirely suppressed expression of a man who had been right about something and found no satisfaction in it. He gestured to the other men, and they moved to the far end of the apartment with the coordinated discretion of people accustomed to making themselves architecturally irrelevant. Taejun took her coat, hung it, turned back to her. "The man at your restaurant," he said. "His name is Baek Sung-min. He's Jinho's head of intelligence." She sat down on the arm of the couch rather than into it. "Intelligence." "He identifies leverage. He locates vulnerabilities and confirms them. He doesn't take action himself. He provides information that allows other people to." A pause. "If he was at your restaurant tonight, it means Jinho has already confirmed your connection to me. What Sungmin was doing was establishing the parameters." "Parameters of what?" Taejun sat on the table across from her, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw. "Of how best to use you." The word use in the particular context of this conversation was not abstract. She understood exactly what it meant and felt the understanding land in her stomach like something cold and heavy. "How long have you known they might do this?" she said. "I told you this afternoon. How long have you known it was likely enough to be the thing you weren't telling me?" Her voice was even. "Not possible. Likely." He held her gaze. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. She did the math without wanting to. 2 weeks ago, she had been in this apartment having dinner, and he had asked her what she wanted to know about him. And she had said what you actually do, and he had told her, carefully, the parts he'd decided she should have, while already knowing that someone with a scar on his jaw was probably going to end up in her section at the Lotus. She stood up. "Nia, don't." She put her hand up. Not angry, past angry, into something colder. "Don't apologize yet. I need to think." She walked to the window. 40 floors below, the city moved with the utter absence of concern it always moved with, and she stood there and looked at it, and breathed and tried to separate the threads. The fear, which was real. The anger, which was real. The fact that she had told him that morning, this morning, 11 hours ago, that she needed him to stop making decisions about her safety without telling her, and he had said agreed without hesitation, and he had apparently made that agreement while already sitting on 2 weeks of information that directly concerned her safety. She turned around. "You agreed," she said. "This morning, I told you I needed to know things, and you said agreed." "Yes." "And you'd known for 2 weeks." "Yes." "So either you forgot what agreed means, or you were going to tell me but decided the timing wasn't right yet, or—" She stopped. "Or you were managing it, which is exactly what I asked you not to do." He didn't deflect. He didn't explain. He said, "Yes, I was managing it." The honesty of it was almost worse than if he'd tried to justify it. At least justification would have given her something to push against. "Why?" she said. "Because I was afraid that if I told you earlier, you'd leave, and I wanted more time." His voice was quiet. "That's the real answer, not strategy. Fear." She stared at him. Kang Tae-jun, who had looked at her with the calm of someone who had never once been rushed in his life, was telling her he'd withheld information from her because he was afraid she would leave if she had it. The feared Korean Mafia boss. Afraid. She didn't know whether to be moved by that or furious at it. She settled on both. "I need to understand what happens now," she said. "Practically. What does it mean that this Sungmin person knows who I am?" Tae-jun stood. He moved to the operations room. She hadn't seen it yet, but she'd known it existed from small signs. A door at the end of the apartment that was always closed, the hum of servers audible if the rest of the space was quiet. He opened it. He gestured for her to follow. She followed. The room was smaller than she'd imagined and more functional. 3 screens on the main wall, a table covered in annotated maps, financial documents, surveillance photos arranged in a grid. The screens were live, showing feeds from what appeared to be multiple city locations. She stood in the doorway and looked at it, and felt the particular vertigo of a thing becoming real that you had previously understood only intellectually. This is the operation, he said. All of it. I'm not keeping parts of this from you anymore. She looked at the maps, at the photographs, at a screen showing what appeared to be a real-time log of incoming messages in Korean. The photos on the right, she said. Who are they? He walked to the wall. He pointed. Park Ji-won, Jin-ho's lieutenant for the New York operation. He's the one who would coordinate any direct action. He pointed to another. Baek Sung-min. You know his name now. He moved along the row. Han Jin-ho. The man in the photograph was in his mid-50s, silver-haired, well-dressed, the kind of face that photographs like a banker or a senator. She looked at it for a long moment. What does he want specifically? She said. If it's not enough to disrupt your operations, what's the ask? Full transfer of the New York financial network, 70% of the distribution infrastructure, operational control within 6 months. And if you don't? Then the disruption escalates until I don't have anything left to protect. She looked at the map on the table, at the territories marked in 2 colors, his and Jin-ho's, the contested lines between them. At the photo of Jin-ho's face, pleasant and unremarkable, and capable of sending a man with a scar to sit in her section and clock the staff entrance. What would you have done, she said slowly, if I hadn't told you about the restaurant tonight? Would you have found out another way? Eventually, Sung-min's movements are monitored. He paused, probably by morning. And what would you have done with that information? He was quiet. Taejin, what would you have done? I would have moved you, he said, without explaining fully why, and told you as much as I thought you needed to know to accept the move without leaving. She turned and looked at him directly, and for the first time she saw something she hadn't seen before. Not in the restaurant, not at dinner, not in any of the weeks between. She saw what was underneath the composure. The 4-hour sleep and the face that didn't perform, and the we'll take this one step at a time we're all organized around. A man who controlled everything because he'd learned, somewhere at cost she didn't know yet, that the alternative to controlling things was losing them, and who was now standing in the operations room of his empire watching the first thing in years that he could not fully control and did not want to. It didn't excuse it. She wasn't making it into something it wasn't, but she understood it in the specific, unglamorous way you understand something true about someone that isn't flattering and doesn't resolve cleanly. Here's what's going to happen, she said. Her voice was calm in a way that surprised her. You're going to tell me everything, not the version you've decided I can handle. Everything. And then we're going to figure out what to do together, not you figuring it out and telling me the result. Together. Nia, I'm not asking. She held his gaze. I'm telling you, because you said you wanted a future beyond violence, and I'm the only person who's offered you one, and if that's real, if what you said was real, then this is what that looks like. You don't manage me. We work the problem together. The room hummed. The screens scrolled. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out the chair at the table and sat down and said, Sit down. I'll tell you everything. She sat. He started from the beginning, not from Jin-ho, but from Seoul, 11 years ago, a decision that had seemed like survival at the time and had compounded into the structure of his entire adult life. He talked for a long time and she listened with the focused stillness of someone doing real work, asking questions when something wasn't clear, not reacting to the parts that were hard to hear. He told her about the trafficking ring he'd dismantled 2 years ago, which had cost him a profitable alliance and earned him an enemy who still hadn't forgiven it. He told her about the shelters he funded anonymously, which Soo-han considered a sentimental inefficiency and which Tae-jun considered the only clean thing he'd managed to do with a dirty fortune. He told her about the people who'd been used against him before and what had happened to them and said it plainly, without softening, because she'd asked for everything. It was past 2 a.m. when he stopped. She sat across from him with her hands folded on the map-covered table and the screens behind him scrolling their quiet information, and she said, Soo-han was right about one thing. Several things, usually. You knew what it meant to let me get close. You knew what the risk was, and you did it anyway. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because the alternative was continuing without you. And I'd already done that for 31 years, and I knew exactly what it produced. She breathed, slow, deliberate. The kind of breath you take when you're deciding something you can't undecide. Then her phone vibrated on the table between them. A number she didn't recognize. A text that consisted of 4 words and a photograph. She picked it up. The photograph was of her building on 141st Street, taken from outside. Time stamped 47 minutes ago, which was while she'd been in the car with Min, which meant someone had been watching her building while she was being driven away from it. The 4 words above the photograph were, "We know where she lives." The text was not sent to Tae-jun. It was sent to her. They had her number. She set the phone down on the table between them, screen up so he could see it. She watched his face do the thing it did when he was processing rapidly. Nothing visible, just a fraction of a second where everything went completely still. Then he picked up his own phone and was already calling before she could say anything, and the voice that answered on the other end was Soo Han's, and Tae-jun said quiet and absolutely flat, "Full lockdown, now, and find out who pulled her number and when." He set the phone down. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the text still glowing on the screen between them and felt the particular sensation of a door swinging shut behind her. Not with violence, not with drama, just the soft, definitive click of a thing that had been partly open becoming fully closed. There was no version of the next hour, or the next day, or the next weeks, in which she was the woman who had nearly dropped a champagne bottle and gone home on the train. That woman was gone. What replaced her was still being decided, and the deciding was going to happen fast, in conditions that neither she nor the man across from her had chosen and could not now avoid. The lockdown happened fast. Within 20 minutes of Tae-jun's call, the apartment had transformed in ways Nia felt before she fully saw. Doors she hadn't noticed before were checked and secured. The elevator access was overridden from a panel near the operations room, and 2 men she'd never seen materialized from somewhere in the building's upper floors and took positions near the entrance without being told where to stand. Soo-han arrived in 31 minutes, which given the time of night meant he'd moved the moment the call ended, and he came through the door with the focused energy of someone who had already moved past the stage of being right and was now purely operational. He looked at Nia first, then at Tae-jun. "Her phone," he said. Tae-jun held out his hand toward her. She gave him the phone. He gave it to Soo-han. "We need to know the vector," Soo-han said, already moving toward the operations room. "If they pulled her number through the restaurant system, we have a leak in a civilian location, which is a different problem than if they pulled it through surveillance of this building." "And if it's the building," Tae-jun said, "then we've had a coverage failure for longer than we thought." He didn't say which would be your fault for the distraction, but the geometry of the sentence left room for it. Nia stood in the main room and watched them move and breathed carefully and did not allow herself to think too far ahead, because thinking too far ahead right now would produce conclusions she wasn't ready to act on. She thought in the immediate. The text was sent while she was in the car. Someone had been at her building. Someone had her number. Those were the facts in front of her, and she dealt with them as facts and not as the beginning of a story about how badly this could go. One of the men near the door, the taller one, who hadn't introduced himself, set a bottle of water on the table beside her. He didn't make eye contact, just set it there and returned to his position. She picked it up and drank half of it and was surprised by how thirsty she was. Tae-jun came back out of the operations room. He looked at her with the direct functional attention he gave everything when he was in motion. "I need to move you. Not tonight. Tonight you're here and this building is secured. But tomorrow, before your shift, you can't go back to your apartment." "For how long?" "I don't know yet." She set the water down. "My lease. My things. I have a—" She stopped herself. A granola bar. Half a month's rent she'd just paid. The nightstand drawer with a piece of paper that had started everything. None of it was worth the sentence she'd been about to complete. "Okay. What do I need to do tonight?" "Nothing. Sleep if you can." "You're serious?" "The next 48 hours are going to require you to be functional. Sleep is functional." He said it the way he said everything. Not unkindly, but efficiently, like it was a resource to be managed rather than a comfort to be offered. She looked at him. He had not slept himself, she could tell. Not this kind of not slept, which was different from the structural insomnia he'd described over dinner. This was the alertness of someone whose adrenaline had reorganized their entire biology around a problem. He was running on something chemical and sharp, and she thought about what he'd said. 2 years without more than 4 hours at a stretch. She thought about what it cost to run on that. "Tae-jun," she said, "go sleep. I mean it. Are you going to sleep?" "Later." "That's not an answer." "Nia." His voice was firm and also underneath, exhausted in a way he was not going to acknowledge in front of his men. Please. She went to the room he showed her, a spare room, clean and simple, with a window that looked north instead of south. She did not expect to sleep. She was asleep within 12 minutes, which told her something about what her body had decided without consulting her, and she slept without dreaming until Suhan's voice in the hallway woke her at 6:43 in the morning. She lay still and listened. Confirmed through the restaurant's POS system. Someone accessed the staff directory remotely. Whoever it is has basic system access, which means either a technical intrusion or an inside contact. Taejun's voice. The staff. Possibly. More likely a third-party intrusion through the restaurant's vendor network. Their system security is negligible. We'll know by this afternoon. A pause. Jin-ho moved his timeline. Silence. The meeting he's been avoiding for 6 weeks, Suhan continued. He's requesting it now, today. He wants a sit-down by 5 o'clock. That's not a negotiation request. Taejun's voice was flat. That's a deadline. Yes, he's moved something up. Whatever he was building toward, the girl accelerated it. Having Sungmin visible at the restaurant was deliberate. He wanted us to know he'd found her. He's forcing the meeting from a position he believes is now stronger. Where? Neutral ground, he's suggesting the Sejong Club. Of course he is, a pause. He owns 2 of the staff. We own 1, so it's not entirely hostile territory. Suhan's voice carried the dry precision of someone who had been doing this accounting for years. You can't not go. If you don't show, he interprets it as acknowledgement that she's changed your risk tolerance. She has changed my risk tolerance. He cannot know that. A longer pause. Something shifted in the hallway. Footsteps. The sound of someone moving to a window. I'll go, Taejun said. Pull everything we have on his current New York positioning. I want to know every card he thinks he's holding before I sit across from him. And the girl. Her name is Nia. And Nia, Suhan said, the concession minimal and precise, goes where during the meeting. Safe house in Queens, Ryu's people. No one outside this room knows the location. And if the meeting goes wrong, then Ryu extracts her, and the meeting going wrong becomes the smaller of my problems. She heard footsteps moving away. She lay in the spare room staring at the ceiling and doing the calculations. A meeting, today, forced by a man who had sent someone to her workplace at 11 at night and texted a photograph of her building to her private number. A meeting that Taejun would walk into alone because that was what you did when you were the person who made decisions, and you had spent 11 years building a structure that depended on appearing to make them without fear. She got up. She used the bathroom, found a toothbrush still packaged in the cabinet. The apartment was stocked with the deliberateness of a space that was used for housing people who hadn't planned to be housed. And she went to the kitchen. Taejun was at the island with coffee and documents. He looked up when she came in. His eyes moved over her face in the way they did when he was taking inventory. You heard, he said. Some of it. How much? The meeting. Jin-ho. The safe house in Queens. She sat down across from him. I want to be part of the planning. Nia? I'm not asking to go to the meeting. I'm asking to be part of the planning. Those are different things. She held his gaze. You said we worked the problem together. Last night you said it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he pushed one of the documents across the island. It was a map of the Sejong Club's interior layout. By 4 in the afternoon, Nia was in a car heading to Queens, accompanied by a man named Ryu, who was approximately the size of a refrigerator and communicated primarily through the angle of his head. The safe house was on a residential street in Woodside, a second-floor apartment above a dry cleaner, unremarkable from the outside in a way that was clearly intentional. Ryu showed her the exits. All of them, including the roof access, which told her something about how seriously he was taking the word safe. She sat in the apartment's front room and texted Jasmine. I'm fine, taking a few days. Don't tell anyone I said that. Jasmine replied 11 seconds later. That's the most alarming thing you've ever said to me. Nia put the phone down. Taejun's meeting at the Sejong Club was scheduled for 5. It was 4:22. At 4:58, her new phone, a replacement Suhan had provided, showed a text from Taejun, leaving now. Ryu has what he needs. Stay put. She stared at those 2 words. Stay put. The entirety of her role in the next hours reduced to a location instruction. She understood why. She even agreed with the logic. It didn't make the walls of the apartment feel less like they were doing something to the air in the room. The Sejong Club occupied the third floor of a building in Koreatown that presented itself publicly as a members-only cultural organization and privately as a space where men who could not be seen meeting in restaurants conducted the meetings they could not afford to have witnessed. The walls were dark wood, and the lighting was designed for privacy, and the staff had been selected over many years for their capacity to see nothing. Taejun arrived at 5 exactly. He was in a different suit than the morning. He'd changed, which was not vanity, but communication, the language of men like him where presentation was always a message. He came with 2 men only, Soo Han and a man named Baek Min Suk, whose specific value was that he looked more dangerous than he was, which in certain rooms served the same function as actually being dangerous. Han Jin-ho was already seated. He was exactly what his photograph suggested. Silver-haired, composed, the kind of face that inspired institutional trust before it earned it. He had 3 men with him positioned with the professional casualness that announced itself as such to anyone who knew what to look for. They bowed with the minimal formality that communicated respect and nothing more. They sat. Tea was poured. Nobody touched it. "You look well," Jin-ho said, in Korean. "And you look rested," Taejun said, in English, which was a message. Jin-ho's expression did not change. He switched to English without comment. "I appreciate you making time. You didn't give me a great deal of flexibility on the timing." "No, I didn't." He set his hands on the table, palms flat, and looked at Taejun with the patience of someone who did not consider themselves to be in any particular hurry. "I'll be direct. Please, your operation is strong. I've studied it for 3 years and I respect what you've built. Dismantling it piece by piece, which is what the current trajectory produces, benefits neither of us and costs both of us significantly." He paused. "I'm proposing a different structure, partnership, genuine division of territory with clear operational boundaries. Your financial network, my distribution expansion, shared governance of contested corridors." Taejun looked at him without expression. "You're proposing this now. The timing is appropriate. The timing suggests you believe you're negotiating from an advantageous position. I believe we've both arrived at a point where the cost of continued conflict has become prohibitive." Jin-ho's voice was smooth. "For both of us. You sent Sungmin to a civilian location last night and texted a private number with a photograph of a building. That's not the behavior of someone interested in reducing costs." Taejun said it the way he said most things, level, without heat, which made it more pointed. "That's the behavior of someone making a demonstration." Jin-ho was quiet for a moment. The demonstration was intended to clarify our understanding of the landscape, not as a threat. Sungmin clocked a staff entrance at 11 at night. Information gathering. About a civilian. About a relevant variable. Jin-ho met his gaze. One that you have, through your own choices, made relevant. I can't be held responsible for the landscape your decisions created. Something shifted in the air of the room, incremental and significant, the way temperature changes before weather arrives. "Here's what I want to know," Taejun said. "The partnership you're describing. What does it actually require of me specifically? Transition of the Eastern Corridor financial clearance protocols to joint oversight within 90 days. Shared access to 3 specific port contacts in New Jersey." A pause. "And a restructuring of the Incheon acquisition to include my organization at the primary level." "That's not partnership," Taejun said. "That's absorption with additional steps. It's a beginning. It's a beginning that leaves you with structural control and me with legacy access to what I built." Taejun sat back slightly. "You've studied my operation for 3 years, you said. Then you know that what you're describing is not something I would agree to." "I know what you would have agreed to 6 months ago," Jin-ho said. His voice remained smooth. "I'm less certain what you'll agree to now." He looked at Taejun with the assessing calm of someone reviewing a calculation they've already made. Men change when they have something to protect. The sentence landed where it was intended to. Taejun did not move. He looked at Jin-ho and Jin-ho looked back at him, and the room did not breathe. Soo-han, to Taejun's left, did not move either, which was its own kind of discipline. "Are you making a threat?" Taejun said, quietly. The quiet that was more dangerous than volume. "I'm acknowledging a reality," Jinho said. You've made personal choices that have operational consequences. I'm simply noting that I'm aware of those choices. He picked up his tea for the first time. The offer is genuine. Partnership has always been preferable to conflict. But if you've decided that your current, a slight pause, personal priorities prevent you from seeing the value of what I'm proposing, I understand, and will proceed accordingly. Proceed accordingly. In the language of men who did not threaten directly, this was as direct as it got. Taejun looked at him for 3 seconds. He picked up his own tea. He set it down without drinking it. I'll consider your proposal, he said. You'll have an answer in 72 hours. Jinho smiled, small, satisfied, the smile of someone whose gambit had produced the outcome they expected. 72 hours. The call came to Ryu's phone at 6:47. Not to Taejun, not to Suhan, to Ryu, which meant the number was either burned or the source was internal, and both options were bad in ways that Ryu processed in the 3 seconds it took him to cross the room from the window to where Nia was sitting. We need to move, he said. She stood immediately. What happened? Location's been flagged. We go now. How the... Now. He was already at the door, one hand on her arm, not gripping, but present. The physical language of someone who needed her body to comply with the timeline her brain was still processing. They went down the back stairs. Not the front, not the roof, the back, through a door that opened into an alley behind the dry cleaner. A car was already in the alley, engine running, a man behind the wheel she'd never seen. Ryu put her in the back and got in the front, and they were moving before the door closed. Tell me what's happening, she said. Someone flagged the safe house location to Jinho's people. We don't know who yet. Ryu's voice was professional, contained. We have 2 other locations. We're going to the second one. The first one being compromised means there's a leak somewhere in the chain between 6 people who knew the location. He didn't elaborate. He was on his phone, texting with one hand, watching the side mirror with the other half of his attention. She sat in the back seat and felt the city moving around the car and thought, 6 people knew. Taejun, Suhan, Ryu, and 3 others she hadn't seen clearly. The math of that was not comforting. Her phone buzzed. Taejun. Change of location. Ryu has it. I'm coming to you. 20 minutes. She typed back, I'm in the car. We're moving. 3 minutes of silence. Then, I know. Stay with Ryu. The second location was a parking garage in Long Island City, which was not a destination she would have selected for the concept of safety, but which apparently had something to recommend it tactically. They went to the 4th level, to a corner position against a concrete wall, where the car stopped and Ryu got out and stood between the vehicle and the open deck, watching the ramp access. She stayed in the car. She watched the ramp too, because sitting in a car in a parking garage watching a large man watch a ramp was apparently the shape of her life right now. And she found she was neither panicking nor numb, but somewhere in the functional middle where your hands are steady and your mind is running and you are aware of being afraid in the structural sense, without letting the fear become the dominant fact of the room. Taejun's car arrived at the 9-minute mark. He was out of it before it fully stopped. He covered the distance between the vehicles in 7 steps and opened her door and looked at her, and she saw immediately that something had happened between the club and this garage that went beyond the safe house compromise. What? She said. Inside the meeting. He crouched down to her level, which he had never done before. It was not a position of authority, it was something else. Jinho knew things he shouldn't know, operational details, timing of the Incheon acquisition, the name of a contact in New Jersey that is known to 4 people, 2 of whom are in this garage. She stared at him. Someone in your organization? Yes. Suhan? No. His voice was completely certain on that. Not Suhan, but someone close. He stood. I was breathing harder than normal, which for him meant barely perceptibly, but she noticed it. I need to get you out of New York, tonight. Tonight. Until I find who it is, I can't guarantee any location in the city. Jinho's people can move faster than I can sanitize the chain. He looked at her directly. There's a property in New Jersey, small, outside Princeton. Only 3 people know it exists, and 2 of them are standing in this garage. And the third? My attorney, who is currently in Seoul and has been for 2 weeks. He paused. Will you go? Not a command, not a management decision presented as a question, an actual question, and the difference between them was visible on his face, the specific discomfort of a man asking rather than directing. "What are you going to do?" she said. "Find the leak, address Jinho's timeline, make decisions that I should have made 6 months ago." His jaw was tight. "The organization needs to change. I knew it needed to change, and I was waiting for the right conditions, and—" He stopped. "There are no right conditions. There's only now." She looked at him, at the parking garage, at Ryu's back, at the city visible through the open side of the structure, Queens spreading below in the November dark with all its lights on, and no idea it was hosting any of this. "I'll go to New Jersey," she said, "on one condition." "Name it." "You don't make any decisions about what to sacrifice without telling me first." She held his gaze. "Not after the fact. Before. Nia, some decisions are going to need to happen in real time. Then call me in real time. I don't care what hour it is." She put her hand on his arm briefly and felt the tension in it. "I'm not standing on the outside of this anymore. Whatever you decide to give up, whatever you decide to burn down, I need to know. Because it affects both of us. We established that." He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. "Agreed," he said. And this time he meant it without the 2 weeks of withheld information underneath. They moved. Ryu drove. Taejun sat in the back with her and was on his phone for most of the Holland Tunnel, speaking in Korean, voice low and controlled, and she could read from the rhythm of it even without the language that he was dismantling something, issuing instructions that were rerouting the structure of things, pulling threads, closing doors. She sat beside him and let the tunnel's fluorescent light strobe across them both, and thought about Jasmine's voice saying, "Are you safe?" and thought, "Mostly. For right now. Mostly." He hung up. He sat back. He looked at the roof of the car the way she'd seen him look at ceilings before, not avoiding, just letting himself be unobserved for a moment. "Suhan's pulling the inner circle tonight," he said. "Everyone who had access to the New Jersey contact, the Incheon timing, and the safe house location. Whoever overlaps all three is the source." His voice was even. "When we find them." "What happens when you find them?" A pause. "Something I won't describe to you." She thought about that. She thought about the fact that she understood it and that understanding it was different from agreeing with it, and that she was not going to resolve that difference tonight in the back of a car in the Holland Tunnel. "Okay," she said. "That doesn't bother you." "It bothers me. I'm choosing to put it in a different file for right now." He turned his head and looked at her. Not the inventory look, something slower. "A different file," he said, almost to himself. "I have a system," she said. "Things I can deal with now. Things that need to wait. If I tried to deal with everything at once, I'd fall apart. And falling apart right now is not useful." "No," he said. "It isn't." A pause. "How long have you had this system?" "Since I was about 9. My mom worked nights and I'd wake up scared, and I taught myself to separate the things I could do something about from the things I couldn't. Do the first ones. Put the second ones in a mental box." And the box. Sometimes you open it later and deal with what's in it. Sometimes you open it and the thing inside isn't as bad as you thought it was. Sometimes... She paused. "Sometimes you realize you've been carrying it so long you don't know what you'd be without it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Which category is this?" She looked at the tunnel light. "Ask me in a week." They came out the other side into New Jersey air and drove west for 40 minutes before turning onto a road that became smaller roads and then a private drive. The house was exactly what he'd described, small and plain from the outside, set back from the road, in the way of something that had been chosen for not being noticed. Ryu checked the perimeter, gave a signal. They went inside. It was warm. Someone had prepared it. Not recently, but the heat was working and there were supplies in the kitchen. Ryu took a position at the main entrance. Taejun moved through the rooms with the systematic economy of someone checking known space. Nia stood in the kitchen and put her hands flat on the counter and breathed. He came back. He looked at her hands on the counter and her shoulders and said nothing for a moment. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face did the thing, the compression, the rapid internal calculation. He picked up. He listened for 11 seconds. He said one word in Korean and hung up. "What?" she said. "They found the leak." His voice was completely flat. "It's Cho." The name meant something to him that she could read in every muscle of his face. Not surprise, which would have been simpler, but the specific devastation of someone whose trust has been removed from a specific place and is falling, and they can already calculate exactly how far. Cho. The man he delegated the Flushing meeting to. The man Suhan had mentioned by name as the one who'd made a decision Taijun would never have made. How long? She said. Suhan says 6 months minimum, possibly longer. His jaw tightened. He was in the room for the New Jersey contact, the inch and timing, the safe house allocation. His hands were at his sides. He was in the room for everything. She looked at him. At what the news was doing to the architecture of his composure. Not breaking it, but stressing it in ways that were visible at the load-bearing points. 11 years of building. 11 years of decisions and cost and damage and occasional terrible clarity about what you had to be in order for the structure to hold. And someone he'd put inside that structure had been feeding the blueprint to an enemy for half a year. Taejun, she said. He looked at her. Breathe, she said. He breathed. She saw it. The deliberate expansion of his chest, the release. He almost never did that visibly. She watched him do it and thought, this is what it looks like when someone lets you see them. His phone rang again. He looked at the screen. He looked at her. I have to take this. Go. He moved to the far side of the house. She heard his voice begin in the other room. Korean, rapid, the tone that she now associated with operational weight. She stayed in the kitchen with her hands on the counter and the house around her quiet in the particular way of places that are usually empty. Outside the window, the New Jersey dark was complete and still. No city noise. No train. No Dominic. No Jasmine. No fire escape and leftover rice. And a piece of paper in a nightstand drawer. She heard his voice rise slightly in the other room. Not shouting, but elevated. The sound of a man reaching the outer limit of what he will accept from the other end of a phone call, and then go flat again, controlled, and then go silent. Footsteps. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. His knuckles on his right hand were split. Not from this evening, from something before she'd been collected from the parking garage. Something that had happened in the hour after the meeting at the Sejong Club that he hadn't mentioned and she hadn't asked about. She saw it now in the kitchen light, the dark line of it across the second and third knuckles, and she did not look away from it, and she did not perform a reaction. Jin-ho moved the timeline, he said. He's not waiting 72 hours. He's making his move tomorrow morning. He's calling in every contact he has to force a public confrontation at the Incheon negotiation. If he can demonstrate that I can't secure my own operation, the acquisition falls apart, and I lose the only legitimate expansion that would allow me to... He stopped. I need to be back in the city by morning. To do what? To end it. His voice was quiet. Not the way he expects me to end it. A different way. One that requires me to give up the parts of the operation that I've been protecting because I built them and because walking away from them feels like... He stopped again. Like losing, she said. Like dying, he said. There's a version of me that only exists inside that structure. If the structure changes, then that version of you is over. She held his gaze. And you're afraid of who's left. He looked at her with something raw and direct that she held without flinching. Yes, he said. She crossed the kitchen. She stopped in front of him, close enough that she could see the exhaustion under the composure and the split knuckles and the thing behind his eyes that was not fear of Jin-ho or fear of losing the operation, but the older, quieter fear of a man who has organized his entire life around a version of strength that has never once allowed him to be uncertain in front of another human being. She put her hand against his jaw. He went very still. The version of you that's standing in this kitchen right now, she said quietly. That's the one that exists. That's sufficient. He'd said those words to her. Weeks ago, over soup in a VIP lounge, she'd said she felt invisible, and he'd said the version of you that exists is sufficient. She watched his face as he recognized them coming back. His forehead dropped against hers. He exhaled, long, rough, the sound of something releasing that had been held a long time. I have to go back, he said. I know. I have to make decisions tonight that are going to change everything. I know. I don't know who I am on the other side of them. She let her hand stay where it was. Then we figure that out together, on the other side. His phone buzzed. He didn't move for one more second. Then he pulled back, looked at her, and the composure was back, but it was sitting differently now. Not armor, but something worn, familiar, chosen rather than required. He looked at his phone. "Suhan," he said, "I have to—" "Go," she said. He went to the door, stopped, turned back with his hand on the frame. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "you need to know that I'm not protecting the organization. I'm protecting the exit from it." He paused. "There's a difference." She looked at him across the kitchen of a safe house in New Jersey at 2 a.m. with his knuckles split and the city waiting and everything they had both been about to become pressing at the edges of the room. "I know," she said. "Go." He went. The door closed. She stood in the kitchen and listened to the car start and listened to it move and listened to the silence after it was gone. And she stood there for a long time with the stillness of someone who has made their peace with the specific shape of the next few hours and is waiting for the world to catch up to the decision they've already made inside themselves. She didn't sleep after he left. She tried, briefly, lying on top of the covers in the small bedroom at the back of the house with her coat folded on the chair and her shoes still on, because keeping her shoes on felt honest about what the night actually was. She stared at the ceiling for 20 minutes and listened to Ryu's occasional movement near the front of the house. A floorboard, the sound of him shifting weight, the small signals of someone alert and present. And she thought about Taijun driving back through the tunnel toward a city that was already arranging itself around a confrontation he couldn't avoid. She thought about what he'd said at the door. "I'm not protecting the organization. I'm protecting the exit from it." She turned that sentence over in the dark, the way you turn a stone over to see what's under it. And what she found under it was not reassurance, but something more complicated. The recognition that a man who has spent 11 years building a thing does not dismantle it in a single night without losing something in the process that he will spend the rest of his life recalibrating. The exit was real. She believed that. But exits have floors too, and you don't always know what you're standing on until you're already through the door. At 4 a.m, she gave up on lying still and went to the kitchen and found coffee supplies and made a full pot and sat at the small table with her hands around a mug and waited for the kind of morning that arrives whether you're ready for it or not. Ryu appeared in the doorway at 4:15. He looked at the coffee. She pointed at the cabinet where she'd found the cups. He poured one, leaned against the counter, and said nothing, which she had come to understand was not unfriendliness, but the particular economy of someone who doesn't use words as filler. "Have you heard from him?" she said. "Suhan checked in at 3:30. They're moving." He drank his coffee. "It'll be done by morning or it won't be done." "What does won't be done mean?" He looked at her with the direct consideration of someone deciding how much the truth serves anything. "It means it gets more complicated." She nodded. She drank her coffee. Outside the window, the New Jersey dark was beginning its slow negotiation with the edge of dawn, the sky lightening by degrees too small to track individually, but undeniable in aggregate. "How long have you worked for him?" she said. 8 years. "Is he—" She stopped, considered the question she actually wanted to ask. Does he do this? Make decisions that cost him things he built? Ryu was quiet for a moment. Once before, in Seoul. He walked away from a network that had taken 6 years to build because it was connected to something he decided he couldn't keep being connected to. He paused. He didn't talk about it. He just did it. Went quiet for about 3 weeks and then came back and started building the next thing. What was the thing he couldn't keep being connected to? Ryu looked at his coffee. Human trafficking. The network had edges he hadn't fully traced when he entered it. When he traced them, he left. He said it simply, without drama. Cost him significantly. He never mentioned it as a sacrifice. He mentioned it once as a mistake, meaning getting in without knowing what was at the edges. She sat with that. The man who'd funded shelters for vulnerable women, who had dismantled a trafficking ring at the cost of a profitable alliance, who had apparently made the same essential decision twice in his life, once in Seoul and once in a kitchen in New Jersey, that some things were not worth what they cost to keep. He's consistent, she said, in the things that matter to him. Yes. Ryu finished his coffee. That's rarer than it sounds. She knew that. She'd known it from the first night, when he'd ordered her dinner and not asked for anything in return, and told her the uncomfortable truth about his life before she'd asked for it. Consistency was not the same as goodness, and she wasn't conflating them. But it was something. In her experience, it was more than something. Dawn came the way it always came. Not all at once, but accumulating, and by 6 the kitchen windows were showing real light, and she had drunk more coffee than was probably wise, and Ryu had been on his phone twice in brief, uninformative exchanges that told her nothing except that something was still in motion. At 6:47, Taijun called. She picked up before the second ring. "Tell me." "It's done." His voice was rough in a way she hadn't heard before, but not from emotion exactly, but from the specific quality of exhaustion that comes after sustained intensity has finally released. Jinho's proposition is off the table. His New York operation is going to have a complicated few weeks. "Are you all right?" A pause that lasted just long enough to mean something. "Physically, yes. And the other way. I'll tell you in person." Another pause. "I'm coming to you. 2 hours." "Okay." "Nia." "Yeah."
I need you to know that what I said last night about the exit, that wasn't something I said to make you feel better about staying. That was the actual decision. His voice was even but carrying weight she could feel through the phone. I want you to know that before I get there, and you see whatever I look like when I get there. "I'll see you when you get here," she said. "Drive safe." She hung up. She looked at Ryu. He was already moving toward the window to check the perimeter approach, because 2 hours meant 2 hours, and the night had not been the kind of night where anything was assumed. She went to the small bathroom and washed her face with cold water and looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. The woman who had gone to work in her non-slip shoes and her name tag 3 weeks ago and had been collected by a black Mercedes and had sat in a VIP lounge and eaten a man's food and told him she'd never been kissed, and who was now standing in a safe house in New Jersey, having not slept and having made the decision several times over in the last 12 hours to stay inside something that was trying hard to injure her. She looked at her face and thought, "You are not the same person who folded that piece of paper into her coat pocket." And she thought, "That's not entirely a bad thing." And she thought, "Figure out the rest later." She dried her face and went back to the kitchen and poured more coffee and waited. He arrived at 8:53. He came in through the front door with Suhan behind him, and the particular quality of two people who have been through something together and haven't yet had the space to separate from it. Taejun's suit was not the same one he'd left in. Somewhere between the Sejong Club and this house he had changed, which meant he'd been somewhere with access to a change of clothes, which meant the night had included more logistics than she'd been told, which she filed and set aside. The knuckles on his right hand had been cleaned. His face was the face of someone who has spent the night making irreversible decisions and is now standing in the specific aftermath of that. He looked at her across the kitchen, and she looked back, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then Suhan said, in the tone of someone clearing administrative items from a list, "Cho is in custody, not ours, delivered to a party with a standing interest in documentation to proceed appropriately." He paused. "The federal angle required a specific approach." She parsed that sentence. "You handed him to the FBI. To a specific investigator who has had an open case for 14 months and needed a cooperative source." Suhan looked at her with the particular expression he reserved for moments when she demonstrated that she was tracking faster than he'd allocated for. "In exchange for documentation that removes 2 of Jinho's primary financial channels from operation and gives investigators sufficient cause to begin formal proceedings against his New York entity. You used your own leak to take down your competitor." Cho's value to us became his value to them, redirected. He said it without satisfaction, which she respected more than if he'd said it with any. And Cho himself. "We'll cooperate extensively," Suhan said, "because his alternative is a conversation with Jinho about why the intelligence he's been selling for 6 months has now been used to dismantle Jinho's New York operation." He paused. "Cho is considerably more afraid of that conversation than of federal proceedings." She looked at Taejun. He had been watching her process this, and his face held the look of someone waiting to see how the architecture of a decision lands on another person after the deciding is finished. "Smart," she said. "Necessary," he said. "Not the same thing." She nodded. She understood the distinction. Ryu moved quietly out of the kitchen, and she heard him speak briefly with whoever had driven Taejun, and the sounds of the house rearranged themselves into a different configuration. Fewer people, more space, the subtle acoustic shift of a guarded location relaxing its posture without abandoning it.
Suhan poured himself coffee with the comfort of someone who has earned the right to make himself at home anywhere his employer is located. He did not leave the kitchen, which she had come to understand was not intrusiveness, but the particular form of his loyalty. He stayed in range of Taijun not to monitor him, but because proximity was the language he used for protection. It was the same language the building of his entire career had been written in. She looked at Suhan. "Can I ask you something?" He looked back with the expression of a man who would not promise yes before hearing the question. "You were right," she said, "about everything. The risk, the timing, the way it affected his judgment." She held his gaze. "And it still went the way it went. He still made the choice he made." A pause. "Does that bother you?" Suhan was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee, then at her with the kind of directness she'd learned to expect from him, which was the directness of someone who does not consider softening a form of respect. "What bothers me," he said, "is when I'm right for the wrong reasons. I told him she was a liability because that's operationally true. What I didn't say, what I should have said, is that I was also afraid of what he'd have to become to deserve her." He paused. "What he'd have to stop being. A beat. That's a harder conversation to have with someone you've worked next to for 7 years. She looked at him. He looked back. Something passed between them that wasn't warmth exactly, but was the foundational material that warmth is built from, the recognition of two people who have been worried about the same person for different reasons. "Thank you," she said, "for being right, even when it was hard." He nodded once. Then he took his coffee to the other room with the timing of someone who understands when they're no longer the necessary person in a space. Taejin sat down across from her at the small kitchen table. He put his hands flat on the surface between them, both of them, so she could see the clean knuckles and the tiredness in his wrists, and the fact that his hands, for the first time in her experience of him, were not entirely still. "Tell me," she said. He told her. He told her about the hours between the Sejong Club and the New Jersey safe house, the confrontation he'd had with two of Jinho's men at a parking structure in Midtown that had produced the knuckles, and a resolution he considered proportionate. He told her about the phone call at 2:30 in the morning in which he had formally initiated the transfer of 3 operational corridors to entities that were not his and would not be again. He told her about the call to his attorney in Seoul, woken at some genuinely inhuman hour, to begin the legal reconfiguration of the Kang organization's New York holding structure. He told her about Cho, not the Suhan version, the full version, the conversation in a room she didn't need to picture, the specific shape of the betrayal that had started 8 months ago when Jinho's people had approached Cho at a time when Cho had believed, perhaps not incorrectly, that Taejun's increasing distraction made him vulnerable. The 8 months of small transfers of information, each one inconsequential alone, collectively catastrophic. "He thought I was losing focus," Taejun said. "He wasn't wrong about the focus. He was wrong about what it meant." What did he think it meant? That I was weakening, that the organization could be peeled. He looked at his hands. He'd been with me for 4 years. He knew what the version of me that was fully operational looked like. He saw me changing and he read it as decline. But it wasn't decline. No. He looked up. It was, I don't know what to call it, reorientation. I was putting weight on a different part of the structure than I had before. It looks like imbalance if you don't know what's being built. She thought about that. About the difference between a man losing his grip and a man shifting his hands to hold something new. About how from the outside, especially if you were invested in the original grip, those two things could look identical. "What does the organization look like now?" she said, "after everything you moved?" He exhaled slowly. "Smaller, significantly. The corridors I transferred, those were profitable. Replacing that revenue through legitimate channels is going to take time." A pause. "The Incheon acquisition is still viable. It's the most legitimate thing I've built in 10 years, and it doesn't require the pieces I let go. Real estate, logistics, hospitality, those hold." He paused. "The parts that don't hold are the parts I should have let go years ago. I kept them because they were mine, and because walking away from them felt like admitting they'd cost more than they were worth. Had they?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "Long before last night." She looked at him across the table. at the tiredness and the split knuckles and the specific quality of his stillness now, which was different from the stillness she'd observed in the VIP lounge on the night this had all begun. That stillness had been the stillness of someone fully in control of a space. This was the stillness of someone who has set down a very heavy thing and is experiencing, for the first time in a while, the sensation of not carrying it. "What happens to Jinho?" she said. "His New York operation is compromised by the federal investigation. The financial channels Suhan documented are significant. Significant enough that the proceedings will be lengthy and occupy his legal and financial resources for at minimum 2 years. Taejun paused. He's not gone. He's not neutralized permanently. But he's redirected, and the leverage he thought he had is gone because the thing he planned to use it on no longer exists in the form he understood. The old organization. Yes." He met her eyes. "He prepared to fight something that I've already stopped being." The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the house settling in the morning cold. Outside the window, the light had gone fully gold, the particular clarity of November mornings that arrived like a statement. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer it the same way you answered me about whether you're dangerous. Straight. Straight." He waited. "Do you want this?" she said. "The legitimate version. The smaller, longer, harder version. Not because of me, not because of what I represent to you or what I said in the lounge or the future you described wanting. Do you want it, for your own reasons?" He looked at her for a long moment. She watched his face do something she'd never seen it do before. Not the compression of rapid calculation, not the steady presentation of control, but something that moved through it like weather, visible in the specific and unrepeatable way that things are visible when a person is allowing themselves to be seen, having an experience rather than processing it first. "Yes," he said, "I've wanted it for longer than I admitted to myself. The Incheon acquisition, I started it 2 years ago. I told myself it was diversification. It wasn't. It was the beginning of an exit. I couldn't acknowledge directly, because acknowledging it directly would have required me to look at what I was exiting and why." He paused. "You didn't make me want the exit. You made me stop pretending I didn't already want it." She let out a breath she'd been holding in a way she hadn't been aware of until it left her. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They sat at the table in the safe house kitchen in the morning light and did not immediately move, because some moments require their own duration, and this was one of them. 3 days later, she went back to her apartment on 141st Street. Not alone, Min drove her, and Ryu came up to the apartment, and she understood from the efficiency of it that this would be the standard configuration for a period of time that had not been specified, and she was choosing not to find that suffocating because the alternative to the protection was a variable she'd already assessed and found less acceptable. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. This was somehow the most disorienting part. The same unwashed coffee mug on the counter, the same pile of mail shoved under the door, the same hallway still without a working light. The nightstand drawer was exactly as she'd left it too. She opened it. The original piece of paper was still there, his handwriting on it, 4 words and a phone number. "In case the floor is wet." She held it for a moment. Then she put it back in the drawer and closed it. She called Jasmine from the kitchen, standing by the window with the street noise below and the gray afternoon light, and Jasmine picked up and said, "Where have you been?" with the particular intensity of someone who has been sitting on that question for 72 hours. "I'm okay," Nia said. "I'm home. I'll explain in person." "You'll explain right now." Jasmine. "Nia, I have been..." A breath. "I've been very worried, in a way that aged me. I want you to know that." "I know. I'm sorry." She meant it fully. "Can we get lunch? Tomorrow. I'll tell you everything I can." A silence, then, "Yes, and it better be somewhere good because I have been through things." "Wherever you want." She hung up. She stood in her kitchen for a moment and looked at it. The small, familiar dimensions of it, the particular light, the coffee mug, the refrigerator that ran slightly loud. The whole specific weight of the life she'd built in this apartment, which was modest and hard-earned and entirely hers, and which she was looking at now from a position that had shifted enough that the view was different without the object being different. She texted Taejun. "Home. Jasmine lunch tomorrow. Everything is the same except completely different." He replied in 4 minutes. "That's an accurate description of most significant changes." She read it twice. Then, "You're not wrong." A pause. Then his reply. "Dinner tonight. Not my apartment. Somewhere ordinary. You pick." She looked at the message for a moment. Somewhere ordinary. She thought about Mrs. Papadopoulos, who always ordered the sea bass. She thought about booths in the back of restaurants where nobody recognized anyone. She thought about a man who had run a criminal empire for 11 years sitting across from her at a regular table under regular lighting, ordering from a menu without a dress code. She typed back, "There's a diner on Amsterdam I've been going to since I was 16. Booths, fluorescent lights, very good pie." His reply came in under 2 minutes, 7 o'clock. She put the phone down and looked out the window at 141st Street, at the particular afternoon light on the brick across the way, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time and wasn't sure she'd ever felt quite like this. Not happiness exactly, which was too light a word for something that had this much weight in it, but the specific sensation of being located, of knowing where you are in relation to something that matters, of having made choices you'll have to keep making and understanding that the keeping is the point. Dominic fired her 3 days later. She had expected this. He left her a voicemail rather than a call, which was so perfectly Dominic that she actually smiled, and in the voicemail he said her unexplained absence had created a staffing crisis that he could not overlook from a management perspective, and that her position had been filled, and that he wished her well in her future endeavors, which he delivered with the particular stiffness of someone reading from an HR template they found online. She listened to it twice. Then she texted Jasmine. "Dominic fired me." Jasmine. Finally, he does something useful. She looked for work the next week because the conversation she and Taejun had not yet had, the one about what her daily life looked like going forward, was one she intended to approach as herself, with her own income and her own standing, not as someone whose circumstances had been arranged for her. She had one interview at a restaurant in the West Village and another at a hotel on Lexington that was looking for front-of-house staff with fine dining experience. Taejun asked, over coffee in his apartment 2 weeks after the New Jersey safe house, "What do you actually want to do? Not as work, as a life." She'd thought about this. She'd had time to think about it. "I want to finish my degree," she said. "I started an art history program at Hunter 3 years ago and stopped because I couldn't afford the credits and work enough hours at the same time." She paused. "I know it doesn't sound like anything except what you want." He said it the way he said things that were simply true. "I'm not asking you to pay for it. I know. I need you to know that I know the difference between choosing to be with you and choosing to be supported by you. Those are different things." He looked at her steadily. "I know the difference too." A pause. "Though I'll point out that the two are not mutually exclusive if the person being supported has clearly established that they know their own mind." She raised an eyebrow. "The Incheon acquisition includes a hospitality division," he said, "which is going to require someone who understands how people experience spaces and what makes them feel valued or overlooked. That's not a position I'm inventing. That's a genuine operational need." He paused. "I'm not offering you charity. I'm noting that your specific knowledge, 2 years of watching how luxury hospitality actually functions from the floor, not from a management office, is relevant to something I'm building. If you're interested, eventually." She looked at him for a moment. "Are you seriously pitching me a job while I'm in your kitchen?" "I'm noting a professional overlap. The pitch would be more formal. You'd make me interview. I'd make everyone interview, including you." He met her eyes. "I wouldn't lower the standard. That would be patronizing." She almost laughed. She held it. "I'll finish my degree first." "Of course. And I want to keep living in my apartment. I'm not asking you to move." "I know. I'm telling you so we both know where I'm starting from." He nodded. He understood what she was doing, drawing the map of herself clearly enough that neither of them would confuse her choices with his circumstances. He respected it. She could see that he respected it, which was part of why she was still in his kitchen having this conversation instead of somewhere else having a different life. "One more thing," she said. "Name it." "Suhan." She paused. "I want to have an actual conversation with him. Not operational, just a conversation. I think he's someone worth knowing." Taejun's expression shifted with something she read as genuine surprise and then as something softer. "He'll resist." "I know. That's fine. I'm patient." She picked up her coffee. "I grew up invisible. I know how to wait people out." Done. The conversation with Suhan happened 6 weeks later, in a Korean restaurant in Koreatown that he'd suggested, which she understood was his territory and therefore his terms. And she accepted that because asking for the conversation at all had been enough of a concession for him to work through, and she wasn't going to compound it. He was already seated when she arrived. He stood when she came to the table, which she noted as a form of respect that cost him something to offer. They ordered. They ate. For the first 15 minutes, the conversation was the conversation of two people establishing that they are capable of sharing a table without it meaning anything more than sharing a table. Then she said, "You said something in the safe house kitchen that I've been thinking about. That you should have told him what you were actually afraid of, not just the operational argument." He set his chopsticks down. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has calculated that honesty is the only non-losing option. "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Because men like Taijun, men who have built what he built, don't take well to being told they need to change. They take well to being told the structure is at risk, because the structure is the thing they understand is worth protecting." He paused. "I know how to talk to him in the language he operates in. The other conversation requires a language he and I have never had that conversation in 11 years. Do you want to?" A pause that was long enough to be the actual answer. "What I want," he said carefully, "is for him to be in a situation where the conversation is possible, where both of us are close enough to something like honesty that it doesn't collapse the entire structure of how we work together." He looked at her. "You've created that situation. I don't know that I'm grateful for how you did it, but I recognize the result." "That's a very complicated form of thank you." "Yes." She smiled. He did not exactly smile back, but his face released something. The particular tension of a man performing watchfulness, relaxing fractionally into something more like presence. "He trusts you," she said, "not just operationally. You're one of the only people he trusts the way people actually mean when they use that word." Suhan was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table. "I know." "Then tell him the real things. When they need saying." She paused. "He'll hear it better from you than from anyone else. And if the real things are difficult, especially then." She picked up her tea. "That's what trust is for." He looked at her with the direct, assessing quality she'd learned was not judgment, but the way he processed everything, fully, without social softening. Then he said, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone easier." He said it plainly, without cruelty. "Someone who would simplify him." "Would that have been better?" He considered this with genuine seriousness. "No," he said finally. "No, it wouldn't." They finished the meal. He paid because he'd suggested the restaurant and therefore it was his table, and she accepted that because she understood the language now. At the door he said, with the formality of something being formally acknowledged, "You're good for him." She looked at him. "I know. He's good for me too." A pause. "That's how it's supposed to work." He nodded once. He walked toward the avenue. She watched him go and thought, "That's a man who will spend a long time deciding what to do with something he can't file operationally." And she thought, that's okay. She knew how to be patient. Spring came the way. Spring always came to New York, aggressively, then retreating, then returning more convincingly, the trees on 141st doing their annual argument with the weather until they finally won. She re-enrolled at Hunter, 2 classes to start, then 3. Art history and a seminar on urban space and how the built environment either includes or excludes the people moving through it, which felt like it had been designed specifically for someone who had spent 2 years being invisible in luxury restaurants. Her professor was a small, fierce woman named Dr. Osei, who had no patience for undergraduate hedging and considerable patience for undergraduate conviction, and Nia found herself sitting in class with the particular physical sensation of something fitting that she had not felt in a school building since she was 11 years old. She kept the apartment on 141st. She went to diners with Jasmine on Thursday afternoons, which became the standing architecture of their friendship. 2 hours, good pie, Jasmine delivering her accurate observations at maximum volume, and Nia listening and laughing and contributing, the specific pleasure of a friendship that requires nothing from you except your actual self. She told Jasmine about Taijun in pieces, over several Thursdays. Not all of it. Some of it was not hers to tell, and some of it required context she couldn't provide without the whole shape of it, which would have taken more than pie. But enough. The man from the VIP lounge, the thing he did, and the thing he was building. The nights that had been genuinely frightening, and the morning in the kitchen in New Jersey, and the diner on Amsterdam with the fluorescent lights. Jasmine listened through all of it. When Nia finished, she said, "You're happy." "Yes." "You're sure?" "Jasmine." "I'm serious. I want to hear you say it like you mean it." "I'm sure," Nia said. "I'm genuinely sure. It's not the same as easy, but yes." Jasmine looked at her for a long moment with the precision of someone reading a face they've known for long enough to know what's authentic and what's performed. Then she said, "Okay," in the tone of final verdict. "Okay, good. You deserve it." She picked up her fork. "Now tell me about this Suhan because he sounds like he's unintentionally hilarious." Nia laughed, full and actual, the kind that you don't manage. Tejan sold the apartment, not his. The building on 141st, her building, the one she'd given up on replacing the hallway light in, the one with the super who fixed nothing and the fire escape she'd eaten rice on, and the nightstand drawer with the piece of paper in it. He bought it without telling her, which she found out on a Tuesday morning in February when she received a certified letter from a property management company informing her that her building had new ownership. She called him immediately. He picked up on the second ring. "You bought my building," she said. "Yes." "Without telling me." "The purchase was finalized yesterday. I'm telling you now." "Taejun." "I know." His voice held the specific quality of someone who has done a thing they knew would require a conversation and has prepared for the conversation. "Before you say anything else, let me tell you what I intend to do with it." She waited. "Renovate. Bring it to code, which currently it is not, in several significant ways. Reduce rents to sustainable levels for current tenants, with lease protections." A pause. "Childcare on the ground floor. There's a commercial space that's been vacant for 2 years. Partnership with a nonprofit that does job training and credentialing for people who need it. Scholarship support through Hunter and City College, available to residents or former residents." His voice was even and detailed in the way it was when he'd thought something through. "It won't be a philanthropic loss. Managed correctly, with the rent structured reasonably, it carries itself." She sat on her couch with her phone and looked at the certified letter and thought about the super who fixed nothing, and the hallway light, and every person in that building who had been navigating a landlord, who had been performing ownership for years without actually doing it. "You should have told me before," she said. "Yes, I should have." No argument, no justification. "I wanted to have the plan ready so it wasn't just the gesture. So you could see what I intended to do with it. That's still managing it. Yes." A pause. "Old habits." She exhaled. "I'll forgive the process if the outcome is real." "It's real. You can see the plans, the nonprofit partnership agreement, the financial projections, all of it. I want to see all of it." "I know you do." He paused. "That's why I had it prepared." She shook her head slowly at the wall. "You're impossible." "I'm improving," he said, incrementally. She almost said, "Yes, you are." But she didn't say it yet because saying it deserved a better moment than a Tuesday morning phone call, and she was already thinking about when that moment would arrive and what it would look like. They married in late October, on a day that couldn't decide between autumn and something harsher, the sky gray-white, and the leaves on their last argument with the wind. The ceremony was small in the way that things are small when the people involved have decided that the event is for them and not for the concept of the event. 12 people. Suhan, who stood in the particular way of someone attending a thing they have decided, after careful consideration, to be glad about. Ryu, who wore a suit that appeared to cause him mild physical discomfort. Jasmine, who cried immediately and without apology and produced a tissue from somewhere inside her outfit with the speed of someone who had known this was coming. Dr. Osei, who Nia had invited because she was the first person in an academic context to ever tell Nia that her thinking was original and that originality was worth protecting. A small thing, said in an office hour, that had lodged itself somewhere important. Taejun's attorney came from Seoul. 2 men who had been with him from the beginning of the New York operation, who had stayed through the restructuring and the loss of revenue and the years of rebuilding that were still ongoing because some loyalties are load-bearing and you don't remove them from the structure. They exchanged words they had written themselves. In the kitchen of the house in New Jersey on a Saturday morning 6 weeks before, sitting across from each other at the small table where she had waited for dawn with too much coffee, and he had walked in with split knuckles and the exhaustion of someone who had just spent the night becoming a different version of himself. He had suggested it. She had said yes before he finished the sentence. He said, standing across from her in October light, "I spent a long time building things that were designed to keep people at a specific distance. Safe enough to be around, far enough not to matter. And then you nearly dropped a bottle of champagne, and you sat in my chair and told me the truth about yourself. And I understood for the first time that I had been confusing distance with safety and safety with something worth having. I'm still learning the difference. I expect I'll be learning it for the rest of my life, and I want to learn it with you," she said, standing across from him. "I was invisible for so long that I taught myself to be grateful for it. Invisible means safe, I thought. Invisible means no one can use what they can't see. And then you saw me. Not the careful version, not the version I put together for a shift. The real one, the tired one, the one who'd never been kissed and was embarrassed about it. And you treated what you saw like it was worth treating with care. You taught me that being seen is not the same as being exposed. I'm still learning that too. I'd like to keep learning it next to you." Jasmine made a sound. Suhan looked at the middle distance with the focused expression of a man managing his own face. Taejun's hands were steady when he took hers. She noticed that. She noticed everything in the way you notice things when you understand you are inside a moment you will return to for the rest of your life. They lived between two cities, Seoul for the spring acquisition work, the Incheon development that was becoming real in the slow way of things built correctly. Permits, partners, the specific friction of legitimate enterprise that Taejun had not expected to find so different from what he'd known before, and which he found, to his own genuine surprise, more satisfying. Not easier, more satisfying. New York for Nia's degree, for Jasmine, for Thursdays and Pie, for the building on 141st that was under renovation, and where the first childcare center opened on a cold February morning, to 11 families who had been on waiting lists for years, and who stood in the lobby with their children and the specific expression of people receiving something they'd been told wasn't available. Nia was there for the opening. She stood in the back and watched the families move through the space and thought about her mother, who had worked nights and slept days and never had anything like this within reach. And she let herself feel that without managing it or filing it away, because she had learned over the course of the last year that some things deserve to be felt in their full dimensions rather than processed into something more manageable. She took a photograph and sent it to Taejun, who was in Seoul for the week. He replied within 3 minutes with a single line, "Show me the rest when I'm back." She put the phone in her pocket and stayed until the last family had finished their tour and the caseworker from the nonprofit was locking up. And then she walked out into the cold February afternoon and stood on the sidewalk in front of the building she'd lived in for 4 years. With the hallway light now fixed and the front door now closing properly, and the fire escape where she'd eaten rice and stared at a phone number on a piece of paper, and made the first of a series of decisions that had led to this specific sidewalk on this specific afternoon. She stood there long enough for the cold to be real. Then she turned up her collar, put her hands in her pockets, and walked toward the avenue, toward the train, toward the rest of the life she was building in the daily and undramatic way that lives are actually built. One choice, one morning, one step at a time. The city moved around her the way it always had, indifferent and enormous, and full of people carrying their invisible weights from one side of it to the other. The difference was that she was no longer one of them. She was visible now. She had chosen to be.